All right, hello guys. How are you guys doing this Sunday? I'm changing the audio settings for just a little bit, see if any of the change improved for the better, for worse. And also just let me know if I'm low in volume because I feel like I'm always a little low. But got that down. That was Sunkissed, my first track ever released. And I always feel like, yeah, the sound quality is always pretty good. And let me take this banner off. You can go ahead and check out my website if you want to check out my music. More to come. I've just been working really hard on my album I'd like to release this month. We'll see. We'll see how it goes. I can't be a perfectionist anymore. Can't put it off too much longer. So let's see what you guys have to say. So audio is coming through nice and clear based on what my prof says. And that's good. I had to grab a cup of water. That's why I'm, a couple minutes late. Thanks for hanging in the chat or hanging out in the chat. And welcome to all artists out there because we're going to be talking about art. You know, it's yeah, I'm going to be talking about art history a little bit, but it's important. It's important if you are an artist kind of to think where a lot of this mentality, I'll get to the video actually right now. One second. Okay, so audio sounds good. And video looks okay to me. So happy to see you. Welcome. Good to see you all. Let's welcome the chat first and then just talk about the importance of the topic tonight. And it's going to be a pretty short lecture. I have bullet points, I have areas of critique, and I have discussion with you. So, because a lot of you guys are artists, or at the very least, you enjoy art in some way. So that's good to see. So, just a heads up, I'll just put myself up there. Heads up, we have some thunderstorms passing us. Internet might be spotty, just let me know. If the video does freeze a lot, first of all, I should check if I have the right Wi-Fi. Okay, the Wi-Fi is right. But if it is spotty, I'll just put myself off camera and then we can just do it with the avatar, the picture. So, all right, first in line is Ghost Planet. Welcome, good to see you. Brian Gilmartin, welcome to see you too. You say you're assuming this is about deconstruction art. Yeah, but deconstruction is a really wide gamut when it comes to art history. So we're going to be talking specifically about a movement that really, well, it's not the only movement, but it is a very important movement in art history that really criticized art. But I don't want to get into the details until I have my bullet points. Because I wrote a few notes this time. Yeah, so yes, you're right, but we're going to be very specific about it. My wonderful prof. Happy birthday to you this week, my wonderful prof. Thank you for calling me Tenuviel, your Tenuviel. Wonderful. And Final Fantasy is in. Good to see you. We've also got our friend Big Al wishing me a great stream and a lovely week. It should be cooler. It's not only Prof's birthday week, but it should be like at least 10 degrees cooler. We've got rain in the background. You probably can't hear it, but I took a walk before the stream, so my voice is probably giving a little from all the humidity and the stuff that's out there. So, oh well. But we should be okay. Drink a little bit more water, and we should be good to go. Brian's talking Final Fantasy. Final Fantasy is talking to Brian. Jigawad, good to see you, channel member. Would parody be considered art that mocks other art? I'm not a specialist when it comes to parody. I mean, I know what parody is. I know what it does. I don't know. That might be an answer for another time or a question for another time. Because parody serves its purpose. It has a really specific purpose, and it should be out there. Partly for comedic effect, but also partly for commentary on any given thing. So, yeah. All right. Scorpiopio. I hope I said your name right. Hello. Hand wave. Hello to you. Good to see you. And more game stuff or drawing stuff. Private Eye, welcome. Good to see you too. And I think that's everyone so far I can see in the chat. So we'll get right to the discussion. Bullet points. This is really a discussion. If you've ever wondered why art out there is pointless, or why it's ugly, or why it's maybe a self-parody, maybe. If you ever wonder why so much of this kind of pointless, ugly kind of art is infesting all of something like popular culture, that we all know. Well, there's a history to it, and we ought to be aware of the history. Now, and it's not just history, it's still, the movement is still going strong in some very, very key places. I can't give you the specifics myself, but the idea of this movement called conceptual art, that is the movement we are talking about. It's still prevalent. Not as historical as before, as it was in the 1960s and 70s, as it was really conceptually initiated in like the 1910s with Marcel Duchamp. It's not historical anymore. It's kind of samey, same old. But it's alive and well. You just got to go to the right places if you want to go. So let's see. Let's see if I can. I'm not going to bring up my notes. Yes. Yeah, I'll go through my notes here. Very, very, well, what I think is brief, but I'll try to go through it first. Then we'll have a discussion on what you think, and then we're gonna talk about conceptual art, and then I have a few points of my own critique on conceptual art. Now, before I start this discussion, I'm not completely against conceptual art as far as some works out there. There are some notable works that I would say are good to behold. They're impressive by nature, but then there are a lot of bad conceptual art out there. And conceptual art as a movement is self-deprecating. It's meant to be. So anything I say that might offend you artists out there, if not you guys in the chat, I know who you are. I know your sensibilities, but any artist who picks up on this topic, who loves this art history, they might be offended with some terms that I'm going to use. But fear not, it's not me making these terms. It's not me calling out these definitions. These are the definitions of the conceptual artists themselves. So all I'm saying, give or take my own points, my own 2 cents, all I'm saying is anything I say definitively that is conceptual art is made by the makers themselves. So let's get right to it. All right, my notes. Okay, conceptual art. This is a specific art movement. The name was given by Sol LeWitt, who is a conceptual artist, from his paragraphs on conceptual art in 1966. But I think the name was also first introduced by Fluxus artist Henry Flint in 1961. So the term itself as a movement, the name of this art movement, was instantiated in the 1960s. But the real attitude behind this kind of art started with Marcel Duchamp, or maybe even some of his contemporaries, with his things like the ready-mades that he displayed in around 1917, most famously his fountain. So that aside, conceptual art is a movement that really took off in the 60s and into the 70s. You could still find it today, different parts maybe of New York, but this was the specific timeline in art history. So conceptual art is an art movement. It basically, a few bullet points that I have, it's the idea or the concept that functions as the artwork itself. It's not the end result. It's not the art piece itself. It's the idea behind the art piece that takes precedence. So it could be a totally bad piece of crud, but if the idea is there, if the idea enlightens you, if it provokes you, then that's the important thing. So this art movement, conceptual art, is the idea or concept. That is the thing that functions as the artwork itself, not the end result. There is a shift in value from the physical object to the immaterial, like the immaterial thought. This art movement also questions and criticizes art establishments that have commercialized art. Yeah, commercialized. So conceptual art is a movement, or it's a type of art form that criticizes the commercialized, because art establishments throughout the 20th century, but especially in the 1960s and 70s, really did make art pieces, certain art pieces, profitable and valuable. I'm not really against that myself, but you know, to each his own if they want to criticize the art establishments. But I do have my 2 cents on that notion anyway. This particular art movement was also very keen on information. It's not so much the object, it's the idea of words and language being defined and redefined, and the information that comes with the concept. And with that, I would say in tandem, it actually there comes a dematerialization of that. So get rid of the material, get rid of the canvas, get rid of the paints on the canvas, get rid of the clay. We're not out for the material, the physical, the beautiful that is the physical. So just those 5 bullet points. Remember, it's the idea that functions as the work of art. There's the shift in value from the physical object to the immaterial thought. There is the questioning and the criticizing of art establishments. There is the source of information. It's all about the information behind the concept and the overall dematerialization. Now, it's not to say that conceptual artists out there worked strictly in those lines. They can't, because they don't believe in boundaries. No, they do believe in boundaries, I guess, but they wanted to break boundaries. They wanted to break borders or cross over borders, because a lot of these people did work with the material, but the material is not the priority. So I have 5 pieces of criteria to, if you wanted to submit a conceptual artwork. The first criteria, the artwork, as I said before, the artwork is the idea, not the execution. Number 2, the artwork frees the artist from his role by breaking conventions, by avoiding the pretext of beauty and skill, and it criticizes the establishment. So your artwork needs to do that for it to be considered the conceptual art piece. Number 3, the artwork visually and materially, if I can say that right, the artwork visually and materially follows the method behind Duchamp's ready-mades. And it also follows the method of extreme simplicity of the minimal art movement. I will talk about that another time, another stream, because I think that's another movement I should really talk about. Conceptual art and minimal art, there could be some crossover, but they are 2 different art movements. Number 4, the artwork is self-conscious in nature, meaning it's meant to be a critique and a commentary on art itself. It's supposed to question art. It's supposed to get you thinking about what art is. So it's self-conscious in nature. It's not just what the art represents. It's the commentary of art that comes with it. And number 5, the artist and his stamp of authority is removed from his work. He is no longer important or even necessary. So if you think about conceptual art, and this was really done in Duchamp's time, and there's probably been iterations of it since then, but calling in, well, this is an example. I'm not saying this is an actual art piece itself, although it probably could be. Let's say you're an artist, but you don't want to be called an artist. Let's say, let me actually go from the notes. Let's say you are calling like a plant, and they have pipes. They have pipes made to install indoor plumbing. And you call in, get your order of pipes, and then ask the guys to go to the art exhibition and place those pipes. I mean, you don't even touch the pipes. Those pipes aren't yours. Heaven forbid you even move the pipes around yourself and place them at the exhibition. That's an example of the removal of the artist. Like, the artist has nothing behind that installation, if you will, except for calling in the plant owner and saying, hey, I need X amount of pipes. Ship this to this location that is the exhibition, and we're good. So it's the removal of the artist. The artist is not important anymore. His his stamp on authority, his ownership, that's all gone. You have to avoid ownership at all costs. Although there are some artists out there that did not do that. They still wanted their name to be recognized and all that. But that is the criteria. So that's the 5, just to kind of narrow it down, the 5 pieces of criteria, just as a recap. The idea takes precedence. The artist is free from all conventions and all pretext of beauty and skill, and the artist can be free also to criticize the establishment. The artwork materially follows the method of ready-mades, and as well as, extreme minimalism. The artwork is self-conscious in nature, and the artist is removed. The role of the artist is removed. The artist is kind of like this elusive figure, because they're not talking about the physical, they're talking about the immaterial. Now, before I get into the chat, I do want to make some I'd like to say some honorable mentions of certain artists, and I'll go through a list, not too long a list, because I think they inadvertently went through kind of a phase. Like, some of their artwork is actually not that bad to behold. Some of it's actually pleasing to the eye, but they weren't going for that because their philosophies contradicted the final result. So one person, a few of these people, Mel Bachner. He's most known for his colorful paintings of words and language, but he himself had an unconventional philosophy of language. His exhibition, called Working Drawings and Other Visible Things on Paper, not necessarily meant to be viewed as art, 1966. That is a title. So maybe things on paper, maybe objects on paper, maybe words on paper, they're not supposed to be art. So it's the artists not calling themselves artists, and it's also they can also say, because they have authority to say, well, this isn't a work of art. Maybe it's not meant to be a work of art, because they want to, like, trip you up, like, it's art but it's not. I'm an artist but I'm not an artist, So but some of his works are pretty colorful. So check out his work if you like some bright, colorful letters and words. He also used galleries as a medium himself. So rooms like big old empty white rooms that would be for an exhibition. The part of the art could be the actual rooms themselves, or door thresholds, or whatever the case is, but the space itself is a medium, which I think is conceptually interesting, but it can get old pretty fast. And then we also have things like architecture. So, you can be pretty artistic about spaces and buildings and all of that anyway. All right, next up is, I hope I'm pronouncing his name correctly, Alighiero Boetti, I think from Italy. He believed that the creative process takes precedence over the final result. So his stuff isn't really that bad to behold either, or some of his stuff, give or take. But he didn't care what the result looked like. He wanted to put in the process. The creative process was the most important. I think there's value to that. In fact, I believe that to be true for my own music composition and also my writing. But I do care about the final result as well. I think that is important. People say, what do they say? Like the self-motivational speakers, they say it's the journey, not the destination. I'm like, it's the destination too. All right, another Marcel Broters, I think is his name, or Broter, or it's a French. I think it's a French name. I'm not sure. Broter. He's actually nothing. Well, no, I want to say that carefully. I wouldn't really pick him as an artist that I would prefer for anything. I just mentioned his name because, well, I probably unsuccessfully mentioned his name, but he's an unsuccessful poet turned artist, so I thought that was funny. So he was unsuccessful with his poetry, so he went to conceptual art, and I just had to mention that. Marcel Broders, I think is his name. Daniel Buren is pretty interesting. He has a signature thing. His signature is vertical stripes, a color against white. So white stripes, maybe with red stripes or green stripes or what have you. And he imposes these big it was sometimes big, like flags or something like that, across the space, maybe people marching down the streets, just as a sign. You know, his signature is acting like a sign against art institutions. Victor Bergen did value material with his use of photography, and I think some of his photography works. He's unlike his contemporaries who did not necessarily value the material, but I'm glad he chose to value the material. I think that's important. Yeah, it's modern art. It's unconventional, but some of his photography I saw was very good. So I'm like, okay, I have to mention him. Hans Peter Feldman, I would say from what I could see, he had fairly good works from just the little I saw of his, but and he would have installations of his art, you know, hanging in space, and I'm like, that's pretty good. And some of his like, I think he would take photographs or paintings. I'm not sure his medium. I can't remember, of the mundane, but he did it in a very nice looking way, in a nice looking installation inside a space. But he did not call himself an artist, and that, you know, we could talk about that. But that's like, if you're in the act of making art of any kind and you're pretty professional and prestigious about it, you're an artist. So, like, the world recognizes you as an artist and you are in the act of creating art. Therefore, you are an artist. So, it doesn't matter that these artists say that they're not artists. They are artists. So, I had to make mention of him. He has some fairly good work, that, at least from what I saw. Dan Graham, is his conceptual art is based on space and architecture. So maybe some people, I wish I had pictures. I didn't really plan that, but Dan Graham, he works in the space with a lot of interesting architectural nuance, and it's not for everybody, but I found it kind of pleasing. But I have I have an affinity. My prof knows I have a strong affinity to anything related to architecture. So anything that's even out there or unconventional that really works with shapes and space, his stuff wasn't bad. It was not unappealing at all. It was actually kind of good looking, at least to me. So I had to mention him. And then lastly, Sol Lewitt, who um, really using the name and it became a thing, conceptual art. He worked. One thing that he worked in was the constant permutations of shapes like cubes, you know, taking a cube, for instance, and rearranging it or having a reordering of different shapes. And I find that visually appealing. Um, Taking up the space or taking up the wall or something, whatever the case is, uh, you know, he probably wouldn't have liked me to say his some of his exhibitions or exhibits are nice looking, you know, interesting to, you know, very engaging. You know, it engages the senses, and I think that's what art does. It engages the eye, it engages the senses. Even if he didn't craft the cube, maybe he did though. I should look him up a little bit more. Maybe he built his installations or his works on the wall. But for what I saw, for what little I saw, I'm like, okay, that's not bad. That's not bad. I think that's pretty good. So anyway, I wanted to mention those artists, and then we'll get back into the chat, and then we'll discuss things in the chat, and then I want to talk about just in general a couple of things that really is my own critique of conceptual art, because I've got a few things to say. Don't know if you need a recap, but if you needed a recap, you can replay this stream if you needed. All right. Brian Gilmartin says, so this conceptualism in art is very heavy on theory and very light on practice. I think that's a really good way of putting it. I think conceptualism, the term, is more a philosophical term, even if it's the same definition or theory behind conceptual art. I think conceptual art actually does use that term conceptualism, but I wanted to be sure. Conceptual art does have a very specific meaning. Conceptualism might actually be the same thing, but I wanted to be sure I was using those terms accurately. Ace, good to see you. Hello, Madame SE. Good to see you. All right, I think actually... Oh, we have a... Nope. That was everyone. One second. All right. Final Fantasy fan says, if you're gonna be making art, you gotta prepare for the worst, because there is going to be people who are either going to like it or hate it. Yeah. A lot of people mock conceptual art, and I think it's fair to do that because originally conceptual art was to mock art, or at least to question it or to scandalize it or to criticize it. And I'm like, well, I mean, if you mock the mocker, I think that's fair. I mean, you're just playing by their rules. So conceptual art is really for a certain group of people with very specific theories and preferences. Final Fantasy also adds, in order to criticize a piece of art, you need to look at it objectively as possible. Keywords, objectively as possible. And then decide whether to admire or resent the work. Yeah, the art is objective, and your experience of the art is what is subjective. That said, with conceptual art, there is it warrants criticism because it's breaking away. It's asking you to avoid skill to make beautiful things. Now, I do think that some of these artists, and indirectly, did make some good-looking things. Maybe they didn't need to, or maybe they didn't mean to. Maybe they didn't even like the end result. Like, I don't like how that looks because it's engaging the senses or whatever. And I guess that's fine. But anyway, yeah, Brian Gilmartin says, sounds to me like this removal of objectivity in art is just another way for people to get away with running their mouths without having to answer for it. So yeah, let's actually talk about that. That was one of my first critiques. Let me double check my notes. Yeah, that was one of my first critiques of conceptual art, because one of my criteria of the bit of criteria that I had is it does question and criticize not just art, but the commercialization of art through art establishments. And so one driving force of this movement was to criticize the art establishments. Now, I know, or really I don't know, the whole drama and the whole scandal of art and auctioning and the wealthy, how to value a piece of art. I don't know much of anything of that world. And so I'm not going to deny that there are gross scandals out there where wealthy people take advantage of other wealthy people, or who take advantage of artists. That's a whole other can of worms that I did not explore this week to talk about. But such an occurrence of, art auctioning and valuing a piece of art, or having the wealthy take a piece of art for their own decorative purposes, well, that was a point of critique among these artists, where they wanted the mundane to enter the art world. They wanted the average person walking by to engage in a bit of art. Now, I'm actually thinking that's okay. Where I would differ is, well, why not hand over good pieces of art to the public to behold? And we do have that actually in today, in the modern art age. We have public funded galleries, aka taxpayer funded galleries, that the government has no problem bestowing upon these major exhibitions, and therefore, the art can be beheld by anyone who walks in that building or who is in that city. Am I saying that's completely wrong? I don't think so. But here's my point of critique. That's an establishment. The government is an establishment. It's an institution. So where are these conceptual artists with criticizing the government? And I found it, I do find it ironic, and this is my point of critique here, is that these conceptual artists really didn't go at extreme lengths. They didn't really adhere to their own philosophies in a couple of ways. The first way, as I just mentioned, they're not criticizing the government for funding these public galleries. Why don't you just build your own warehouse or buy a warehouse? You know? Get some money. Like, artists are probably rolling their eyes at the notion, but in all seriousness, get some money, buy some property that is easily accessed, off a highway or whatever, an old rundown garage. Have it be like a contribution of some kind of all these artists, contributing to the space with their own money, and then having their works be broadcasted or displayed, to the public, and have that warehouse, for instance, off the highway be a famous location. But they never, I didn't see any criticism of government-funded exhibitions. So when they were criticizing, and they still are probably criticizing the elite, the elite with these very fancy galleries, it's like, well, you're still using a government-funded space to display your work. If you really wanted to take it to the extreme and really make a statement, you should have just displayed all your art in some like unknown area where it'd be happenstance, like some person would come. I was like, oh, whoa, what is this? And then maybe they would tell other people, like, have you seen this place, like out in the cornfield? But no, they needed enough of the institution to have their works viewed just like wealthy people with their own properties, with their own space. It's like, oh, well, we can't have the wealthy, prioritizing art over us prioritizing our art. We still need to make our art known everywhere in a major city. We still need to make our statements known in the public space. And we got to bring down the establishment, got to bring down the institution. But while we do that, we're going to have a government-funded space. See how that works? It's like, I wish the conceptual artists really went like to the nth degree with their philosophy and then showcase maybe they would buy their own property or showcase all their stuff in a remote location. Like, like the hippie music festivals that are out in the middle of nowhere in Arkansas. Like, have that be the case. But no, they needed their galleries. And someone might argue saying, well, they use the galleries as the medium. It's like, well, that's a good excuse for keeping the money, coming in from the government. Now, it might not just be the government that's funding these galleries. It could be donors. It could be contributors. It could be a patronage of some kind. But the point is, it's like, so you have your own patronage of some kind. You have your own institution of some kind to make these anti-institution statements. Now, someone might argue, but that's genius. It's so ironic, bro. So deep. They're contradicting themselves. Like, they're artists, but they're not calling themselves artists. It's so deep, man. So deep. I can see like someone in the 60s just like talk like that, under some substance and say, but it's really deep if you think about it. And it's like, it sounds clever on the surface, but it's really not. It's kind of like a con man, like someone who's really clever with language in order to swindle you. So that's one critique I have. The next piece of critique that I have is this movement that was centered on, or rather prioritized, avoiding artistic ownership. Now, I find this funny because a lot of people who made commentary on this movement that is called conceptual art were, in one form or another, they were complaining or they were pining over the fact that a lot of people aren't mentioned in history, or where are these women artists, or where are these minorities, or even not so, like, even just the normal demographic of the time in New York. Where are all these artists? Why isn't YouTube? Why aren't these textbooks? Why aren't these college instructors not mentioning this artist or this person over here? It's like, well, if you think about it, the conceptual artist of that time might have wanted to avoid recognition because ownership was to be avoided in the conceptual art world. So actually, if you think about it, historically speaking, it doesn't matter if no one is ever mentioned ever again. But what's ironic is that there are so many people in the conceptual art movement that are recognized. They've got their profile pictures, they've got their old vintage videos of recording performance art, they've got photography of them, they've got self-portraits, their names are known in all the art circles, their names are brought up time and time again in art lectures, whether on YouTube or in the college space, and yet their sentiment was artistic ownership should be avoided. And again, it's really deep because it's a contradiction, man. I always feel a little snarky when there's like this silly contradiction. Like these artists in this movement are so serious. Like we're so serious, and we gotta avoid artistic ownership, and we gotta stick it to the institution. But let's take photographs of ourselves. Let 1960s. Let's make this remembered. Okay, I'm going to take a photograph of you. I'm going to draw a self-portrait of you. We got to record your performance art because, you're a thing now, and you want to be remembered for your performance art. But you're still not an artist, and you still can't be recognized. Your ownership cannot be recognized. That's not your art. 1967 by this artist, like everything's recorded. So it's a self-defeating motive, and maybe that's what they were after. Maybe they wanted to go meta on you, but it's really not meta. It's more con man. It's like we're telling you this about ourselves, but we're not really following through. So again, point of criticism is like if I could travel back in time, and if these were written in their pamphlets and in their paragraphs and in their text and stuff, and they had all these, motives pinpointed saying no ownership, I'm not an artist. I'm like, okay, wait a second. Then I would do everything I could to encourage them to go out to some remote location where their art would never be seen and where their names would be forgotten. Right? Anyway, one sec. Let me grab some water. All right. Eloise is in. We've got also Amy L. Good to see you. Andreas, channel member. What did you miss? Well, I had a short lecture, and now I'm just discussing the conceptual art movement. All right, Amy L says these spaces actually exist. They're called artist-run centers, but they still receive government funding. Yeah. My whole point is like they're against the institutions except when it's convenient. And I gotta say that, It's like, man, put your money where your mouth is. Put your non-government funded money where your mouth is. Let's see, Final Fantasy. Artists would roll their eyes at something like that if they're a faker. Yeah, it's a very strange notion to be in the act. Like, it is ridiculous if I'm in the act of composing music and I don't call myself a composer. It's a silly notion. It's like, yes, I am a composer. A composer makes music. That's what a composer does. Now, I can stop being a composer, so that means I stop composing music. And then at that point, I could tell people, say, yes, I'm not a composer. Presently speaking, I'm not a composer. I was 10 years ago, but I'm not now. I mean, that's the only way you can say that. I hope I'm saying this correctly. Okay, gotta put your name up. And Prof, how do you pronounce that? Sagacity? Is that how you pronounce? I feel like I've heard that word before. I'm gonna look it up. Sagacious, I think. One sec. I'm looking it up right now. Yeah, sagacity, I think is how you pronounce it. The quality of being sagacious. No, yeah, sagacious. Having or showing keen mental discernment and good judgment. Shrewd. Yeah, I heard that word before. Now here comes my prof. Sagacity. Okay, Sagacity Beats, welcome. I've seen you before. I think I think you commented on one of my recent, or not recent, but you recently commented on, I think, a Logic Pro video. Yeah. Welcome. Good to see you. Brian Gilmartin says, I suppose this is where I make my usual quote, government stinks at everything speech, everything when it comes to art. Dustborn, anyone? Oh, wow. If I'm thinking of the event, yeah, wow. Andre was like, totally rad, man. My art is so deep and complex, man. I mean, again, like this movement was in the 60s and 70s, so. And again, I do want to, like, I'm kind of cheeky and mocking conceptual art, but I do like some of the works. But notice, I like the result of some of the conceptual artwork. There's modern art out there that I don't mind. I like a lot of modern art if done well. And I can say the same thing of conceptual art. If the result is pleasing to the eye, or if it engages me, if it engages the senses, then I'm like, yeah, let's do it. I like that work. But you're not supposed to think it's good looking. Sorry, that's my subjective experience. Final Fantasy says, how can you be an artist and yet not be one at all? Exactly. It's like they're trying to be meta about it. Like, well, who was the artist that I mentioned? Let's see, Hans-Peter Feldman. And he probably likely said he wasn't an artist because of the removal of the artist. Like that was the motive for conceptual art. It's like the artist does not matter, or at the very least the artist is not as important as he was before. Like the spectator is as equally as important. One sec, I have to cough for a sec. All right, thanks. What was I saying? Yeah, the role of the artist is removed, and the spectator's experience of that art is what is important. Now, I think that is part of the art experience. The spectator's art. One sec. I think I went a little blurry, but if I'm not freezing, that's fine. But anyway, the spectator, yeah, their experience viewing the artwork is important. It's part of the integral artistic experience, no question. Like, yes, I'm writing a book, I'm writing a story with the intention, with having it in mind that that someone's going to read it. That's absolutely important. That's part of the whole integral artistic experience. But at least, especially with my own experience in music college or the music department, not only is the composer not as important as before, but the person in the concert hall listening and actively participating is as important as the composer. And that was a huge thing with the 1960s and 70s, postmodern or it wasn't really called postmodern. I don't think it's called postmodern music, but it's that idea where it's like the role of the artist is removed, the role of the composer is removed. And I think I was like, well, if that's really the case, then people coming in not knowing anything about music or how to instruct an ensemble, no matter what it is, like it could be chance music, like with John Cage's I Ching, or chance music. But if you don't have the artistic sensibilities, you're just a spectator participating, then there's not really an event to begin with. I mean, again, it's going back to the extreme. Like if you really do adhere to this kind of philosophy, I would say, okay, you composers out there, you music people in the music scene of Seattle out there, Wayward Music Series, I'm looking at you. I don't think you're watching this stream. It would be nice to see a group event like Wayward Music Series in Seattle. Just like announce that, people from all over the city just to come into this location. No composers, no musicians, not one iota of any musical direction or sensibility. Would there be a meaningful experience? I don't think so, actually. I really don't think if there's no one to give musical artistic direction, even it's even if it's very, very light, even if it takes no work at all for the musician or the composer, it's not going to be the same experience. The musician, the composer, the ensemble, the group, they have some artistic direction. They have some sensibility to make a very distinguished event versus just people as spectators coming in and staying in a room like, okay, what do we do? Maybe that's been done. I'd be interested in seeing the result. But I don't think just anyone willy-nilly without any artistic tendencies, without any propensity to create art or to create an artistic experience can do that in a group setting. Therefore, I again, that's a point of critique against something like conceptual art. It's like, yeah, you can have the spectators. That's really important to have with the artistic experience, but there is some artistic direction of some kind made by the artist. That's all I'm saying. All right, let's continue. Final Fantasy says people sometimes smack on the head. Yeah. Okay, Sagacity Beats says I'm the only one that says it right. Awesome. Sweet. It's amazing, you know, sometimes the English language can be very hard. So I'm okay, Sagacity Beats. Which makes me think you're a musician, since you have beats next to your name. That's cool. And I like the logo. That's great. I was like, it's a good idea to have an artistic name that starts with S. And then momentarily I thought, oh, I wish my artistic name started with S. And then I'm like, oh, yeah, it does. But why I say that is S is a really nice letter for logos. Yeah. All right. Well, definitely we'll check out the music if you have any. So yeah, that's my take on concept art. I just want to double check my notes just to make sure I got everything. But man, I finished in 1 hour, under an hour, which is yeah, pretty good, pretty good. So as a recap, this art movement, conceptual art, this was a movement in the 1960s and 70s. It's the idea that functions as the artwork itself. There's a shift in value from the physical object to the immaterial thought. The movement questions and criticizes art establishments. It's all about information and dematerialization. And actually, one thing that I wanted to say, I had another point of critique. What was it? Oh, yes. Well, it's kind of in tandem with the avoiding artistic ownership or the removal of the artist. I will give you a question, a brainstorming question, my class. What's the inherent problem of placing the immaterial thought over the artwork itself? It means that everyone can be an artist, a so-called artist. Like Professor Geek talks about it all the time with his streams, and I talk about it too. Because he's an editor, he's a professional editor, and he edits manuscripts and college papers and the like, and you can have an idea. Anyone can have an idea. We're imaginative creatures, okay? We are very creative. The human race is a very creative species. And therefore, we have good ideas. Ideas are great. Ideas are good to have. But ideas well executed, that distinguishes the human being from the maker, so to speak. Like, yes, a human being who is a maker, but someone who is a true master, a true creator, can execute those ideas, can translate those ideas where it could be received by the public. You know, so for instance, the musician who is a professional musician can play on stage the concerto that the composer had in mind. And so, like, it's you know, you can't really play a Mozart concerto unless you've mastered your instrument or you've mastered music sensibilities. And then you translate that concerto with your instrument out into the concert hall, and everyone at the same time receives that piece of music. Maybe differently, maybe some people love the concerto more than others. So the the receiving of the concerto is what is subjective, but they're still receiving the same information because the execution was masterful. Now, if you switch the roles, if the physical object or the concert hall, the music in the concert hall, that's an aural, ear, aural translation, but it could still be the physics of music. We receive music as the same bit of information, so it's a temporal art form, but it's still an art form. But that physical object swapped with the immaterial thought. It's like, well, then you've reduced to everyone being able to make art. That's not to say, I'm not saying like no one can, what am I trying to say? I think everyone is creative in some way. Now, I know some people say, I don't have a creative bone in my body. I think there's some creativity. Everyone is creative with something. It can be small and it can go unnoticed, but it's the execution of that thing. Like, someone can dream up a really nice dessert. Like, wow, that would be a really nice dessert to have and to share with family. But can you make that dessert? That's where the execution comes in. So that was my other point of critique. The removal of the artist, because once art becomes immaterial, like the immaterial thought of something, it's like, well, anyone, if they think deeply, if they think really hard, anyone could do that. Anyone could have a very interesting thought that enlightens and provokes and all that. So anyway. Oh, let's see. Yeah, Final Fantasy is like, if everyone is an artist, then there's not really an artist out there. Brian says ideas are easy, putting them into practice is the hard part. Private Eye says not everyone can be an artist, but a great artist can come from anywhere. I think that's well put. That's well put. I mean, I even noticed. I think I heard Ethan Van Sciver at one point say, "Not everyone could do art," and we have grown. I think in recent generations, we've been brought up, like whether it's a commercial or a TV show. Children have been brought up with these fanciful notions that they can do anything, and that's simply not true. They can do anything as long as they put their mind to it. Now there is truth to that. Like, you got to put your mind to something, and then it will foster, and you will be proficient at whatever. But it's an impossibility to be proficient at everything in the whole wide world. Even if I started very, very young, based on my height, based on my stature, based on my gender, I could never be a professional basketball player. I could never jump so many feet into the air. It's like, I'm not built for that. I don't have the physical stature. I don't have the gender for it. I'm sorry. It's tall men. It's tall men who can do that. That's why the NBA is way more exciting to watch if I ever watched sports. The NBA is way more exciting to watch than women's basketball. Sorry, ladies. Even if I started my life over with the hopes and dreams that I could be a professional basketball player and jump like a tall man would jump, it's like it's an impossibility. It's just based on how I was constructed, how I was made. And I know there are fields where people can excel, where anyone can excel if they put their mind to it, but it's not everything. And so not everyone can do art. And it's okay. I've made that point before. It's like, it's okay. It's what makes art special, And that's not to say you can't enjoy art. So let's say you are not an artist, you have no inclination, you have no sensibilities to art. You could still enjoy art. You could still enjoy things done well, So Private Eye says you can have a good idea, a great idea even, an idea that can change the world. Now go and change the world. Yeah. Whoa, says Andreas Fernandez. Oh, you're a member. I need to put up your comment. Whoa, Sound Engraver, women can't play basketball? Canceled. I'm not saying they can't play basketball, but it's not as fun to watch because it's just not as dynamic. It's just not. It's okay that it's not. women can be good at some things that men aren't, and men can be better at things that women are. It's like it's okay. To be fair, says Amy, when we first moved, we thought NBA was boring because these players were so tall. It felt like there was no skill involved. Well, I'm no sports expert, but I mean, my favorite sporting experience actually was I lived in Milwaukee at the time, and my roommate and I went to see the Brewers. Baseball's fun. Baseball's a fun experience, but I'm not a sports fan. Like, oh, you like baseball? Let's go. I'm like, no, no. I actually the Milwaukee Brewers Stadium, beautiful, magnificent piece of architecture. These steel ramps and walls and elevators. I mean, it's just so good. The architecture of that stadium is so good. I had old pictures too. Man, like I don't keep track of these pictures I take. I don't take a lot of pictures. Professor Geek knows that. I took a picture with my roommate, and we were like so far away in this just gigantic stadium of steel, and just it was like a skeletal structure it was green too. Maybe I think it was painted. I'm not sure, but it was massive, and it was so good. And I was like, I don't take pictures, but can you take a picture of me and my roommate? Because it was like so good. And I think I asked her. I think we're like, we got to do this with our arms, like, and kind of bend down and like, hey, look how big this is, because it was so impressive. But other than that, I can't talk right now. Other than that, it's it was fun. Baseball was fun, but I like the stadium more. All right, I think that's everything I had to say, guys. So I don't know. I might talk about minimal art as well because it's more or less following the same concepts of conceptual art, but there are other motives. There are other principles behind it that are also controversial. Um, it's just, the 20th century. Yeah, again, this is just, I'm not going anywhere unless we have nothing else to say, but just as a recap, the the infestation of pointless art. If you ever see, well, why did they make that show? That was pointless. Why did they write that story? That was pointless. Why did they do this concert? That was pointless. It's because it comes from a whole century of these theories where beauty doesn't matter, it needs to be avoided. Aesthetics is tyrannical. They people thought that. Like, it's like, okay, the artist must break free of the conventions and the aesthetics. It's like you actually disabled the artist that way. I know that's a strong word, but you really did disable the artist. It's like there were reasons why we have centuries and centuries of art. And there's also some lecturer I listened to. I didn't agree with a lot of things he was saying, but his name is Stephen Hicks. A lot of people like him, a lot of people don't. I don't really know much about him. So there were points of disagreement I had. But he did talk about how there's been centuries of progressive art, meaning art continued to evolve with technology, with material, with civilization. It changed more and more. Like if you go from the Renaissance to the Baroque, there's a huge expansion of change in visual art, also music too. Uh, and then you go from, the Baroque to the Classic period, and then into the Romantic period. I really don't know the technical terms, the chronological terms for visual art. Maybe it's the same with music. Then you go from the Romantic to the Impressionism, and the Expressionism, and then the Cubism and Futurism, and all of that. There was always a progression of some kind. Not necessarily leaving the art space, but really between the philosophies of the Enlightenment and then getting into World War One, people decided to just mock all that came before. Everything's pointless. Everything's futile. We need to make people on edge and uncomfortable because of all the atrocities we've faced. That's one aspect. It's not the aspect, but it's a major factor. into the commentary, into the criticism of previous art. And then 20th century happened. This is what he said, the professor, Stephen Hicks, I think is his name. He said that everything was a real big break away from traditional art. And then decade after decade, excuse me, decade after decade, it was getting to be the same with just a new flavor. So like minimal art is kind of a new flavor of the same philosophy that had come before. And art really did not progress after that. It was just always about making people uncomfortable, always about breaking conventions. Like, okay, well, what conventions are you breaking now? Because if you're doing the same thing that the artists of the 60s and 70s were doing, what are you doing that is progressive? Nothing. You're not doing anything. You're not progressing. You're just staying, you're stagnant. It's a stagnation of art. Now, technology might have a hand in that. Installations might look different. The application of visual installations might be different. But a lot of contemporary art and a lot of postmodern art is fixed in this like it's like in the stasis of sameness. It's not progressing. And the reason why it really isn't is because it can't. It can't progress. As soon as you break all the rules and break away from all conventions of what had come before, it was my experience with music. Chance music started sounding the same. Atonal music, no matter what instruments you worked with, no matter what ensembles, whether it was a physical ensemble that was with instrumentalists or with even electronic music, even, well, I would say, okay, there was a distinction between computer music and the music of the acoustic, electroacoustic instruments. Okay, that sounded somewhat different, but but electroacoustic music now done in the schools sounds like stuff of the 70s and 80s. It has not progressed at all. Music has not progressed. Art has not progressed. I know I'm making these bold statements. I can't really speak for visual art, but I can speak for music. Music in this art world that I talked about last week has not progressed. It's because it can't progress from something that is out of nothing. If you have no boundaries, no rules, no principles, besides self-contradictory principles, if you don't have any of that, you cannot progress. You cannot move on. And so that's why actually as a composer, I'd like to work in more mainstream electronic music, not EDM, not house. I have eclectic electronic music, but I pull in from all styles. And then sometimes an album will be upbeat and accessible. I would love to explore ambient down-tempo someday and be very experimental. I am experimental, but I'm going back to the tradition. And I think contemporary artists, they're refusing to go back to tradition and make something experimental that is also traditional. I love that idea. I love experimentation that is also appealing to the traditional style. One example is an album I was listening to last night, late last night, and it was by James Murray, and he's from the Ultimate Records. He's a composer. He's an electronic music composer. And forgive me, I'll mention the album next time. I forgot the name of it. I was listening to 2 of his tracks, and I gotta say, it was very experimental, but it was very riveting. It was very gorgeous. And I was like, that's what we need. We need artists that are experimental in their timeline, but are not afraid of going back to what is the true, the good, and the beautiful. So that's all I have to say. So that was my lecture on concept art. Some final words. Okay, gotta go early. Thank you, Andreas. Final Fantasy says shock value. Yeah, exactly. It's been shocking since like the 1950s, but really as early as the 1910s. Yeah. Oh, stunning and brave. Well, shout out to you, channel member. I'm actually just probably ending the stream. So, Final Fantasy fan says self-contradictory principles equals self-fulfilling prophecy. Yeah. Yeah. That is a good way of putting it. Let me grab some more water. Some things on my channel. I've got enough material actually to do some SuperCollider lectures or demos rather with my instructions, so you would see my face. Those have been pretty popular, but two things: I need to organize the material, and I also am really trying to finish my album. So YouTube this month will probably take a back seat, but that's only because I'm trying to work very hard on my music. But it's always tempting for me to always just kind of like, oh, can I record a video this week? That'd be good. But they always take a little bit longer. It's like, ah, that's like 2 hours away from my album or longer. So in any case, SuperCollider videos will continue to come, but I do need to get that album. As Stunning and Brave Megatron says, better late than never. So let's end it there. Thank you guys so much for watching and listening. And until I see you next, keep producing, preserving, and promoting that wonderful art, conceptual or not, that art that you love. I'll talk to you later.